Highly recommend going to hang out with Equality Florida wherever they're showing up. All right, so while we continue to wait, oh yes,
What?
we have success. Hi,
What?
Nadine.
Hello. Am I in?
Welcome. You are in. You are
Oh,
official. We're running now. How are you
whew.
doing?
I am so relieved. I've never been so happy to see somebody's face.
Oh,
Hello,
hello.
hello.
I already ran through your intro, if that's okay. And I did,
Yay.
I said that your pronouns were she, her. Is there anything else you want to add, or should we just jump right into
Let's
questions?
jump right in. Good to
I
see
love it.
everybody. Thank you for all your patience. This is our
Uh,
maiden voyage.
yes, it's actually both of our maiden voyages on the Instagram Live. So thanks y'all for hanging out and still being here. All right, I'm gonna get started because we actually have a lot of questions and we had some people submit, and then we'll kind of get through it, and then you can add stuff too as we go.
Okay, phenomenal.
All right. So Florida has been called the epicenter of anti-LGBTQ policies, but also the epicenter of fierce resistance. Why should the rest of the country be paying close attention to what's happening in Florida?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. Yes, we are absolutely the front line. And the reason people should care is because chances are pretty good you've got family that lives here. But Florida is a bellwether state. Like, as goes Florida, often, so goes the nation, for good or for ill. And we are the test kitchen for all of the madness that they intend to export to your front step. And so our message has always been, you don't abandon the front line in a fight. This is not a state fight. These things that we're fighting in Florida are national battles. And better to beat them here than have to fight them where you live.
Yeah, absolutely. What are examples of the ways that like Floridians and especially queer and trans people, parents, students, teachers, how are people pushing back?
Well, it has been really quite amazing. In fact, we started this thing called Coast to Coast for Equality because we knew the headlines were telling people about the attacks, but they weren't really telling people about the resistance and just how effective it has been. For example, the Don't Say Gay, Don't Say Trans bill, we were able to take them to court with our coalition partners and gain a settlement that secured almost everything that we were asking for. And in fact, went further. And we now use that to stop some of the worst things that have been happening in our schools from happening in our schools. One of the things I'm proudest of is in response to this onslaught, Floridians have not ducked the fight. People wonder when you're under this kind of attack, do people get smaller, hide, and try to avoid the conflict? And we've seen the opposite. Florida has more prides than any other state, and the turnout at those prides is greater. When we have our galas, our events, the turnout is greater than ever before. When we had our big lobby days in Tallahassee, it was one of those we're going to need a bigger boat moments because so many people are showing up, and the coalitions are really unprecedented. There are groups that we haven't worked with before, but the situation is so dire that everybody is looking around and discovering, we've got to link arms in dangerous times. So we've been able to defeat in the last session 21 terrible anti-LGBT bills. This session, we defeated every single one of those bills, and it was because we have fought them at every turn, whether it's a school board meeting, a county commission meeting, a state agency that's been weaponized to do us harm, or going to Tallahassee, which if you know anything about Florida, Tallahassee is the least convenient city to get to. And that's on purpose because they don't want to hear from the people. But by the busloads, we go to Tallahassee and we make them listen to our stories and we hold them accountable. And so our biggest message beyond the state of Florida is you got to throw sand in the gears at all times, even when people tell you you can't win. You don't know the one thing that is going to run out the clock, derail them, or make them say out loud the part they don't want to say out loud. And
Mm,
suddenly you've got that for your court case to show that this was driven by nothing but discrimination and animosity.
Yeah. And I appreciate what you're saying about, people hear about the laws trying to be passed, but we don't hear about the resistance outside of Florida as much. And so I think that's part of the reason I so wanted to have you on here to tell us more and show us your ways, because I mean you're obviously doing it. So having said that, if you can name the core pillars of the Florida resistance playbook right now, what would they be?
I would say it is uh, do not capitulate, no matter what. You always confront however they're attacking you, no matter whether it's local policies, state law, agency policy. Um, the other thing is don't let them define us. They tried to call this bill that would ban books, increase surveillance at schools, rob parents of the ability to ensure that their kid is safe. All of these things they wanted to do, they try to wrap it up in this language of parental rights. And we said, nope, this is the don't say gay bill. This is the don't say trans bill. This is about censorship, surveillance, government intrusion. This is about giving a bunch of busybodies more say over what our kids are learning in school than the teachers or the parents. And we were able to confront at every turn. So that's part one of it. The other is to build those coalitions, reach out. It turns out, for example, we created something called Parenting with Pride. And part of it was that we were suddenly getting, connected to a whole bunch of parents who go, my kid went back to school and all the books are gone. Or my kid went back to school and they're not using the proper name. Or our favorite teacher, my son's favorite teacher, is about to be fired because she had a rainbow flag, necklace. All of these things that were happening. But parents would reach out, and we realized that, again, we were going to need a bigger boat. So we launched Parenting with Pride, and it's gone from a few dozen families to thousands of families. We've had more than 4,000 families turn up at more than 500 school board meetings and push back against the so-called Moms for Liberty. And to be very, very clear with everybody, Moms for Liberty isn't about moms and it ain't about liberty. It's a political cosplay group concocted in a right-wing think tank, and the whole purpose of it was to put a veneer of parents over their political agenda. But what we ended up doing was actually having parents in that school district with kids in that school, not people pretending that they had kids in the school. And when you see the fake next to the real becomes very apparent. And so not only have we been able to push back in so many places against this extremist agenda, but in some ways, Moms for Liberty has become a bit of a toxic brand. 72% of their candidates lost in this last election up against our pro-equality candidates. And I think it is because we've done that deep grassroots organizing. And, we literally had parents that we had to say, we don't care what your political affiliation is. If you call us, you reach out to us and your kid needs help, we're going to help you. There's no litmus test. But what ends up happening is once a parent sees, hey, this is happening in my school, why is that happening in my school? Well, if you want to go to the school board meeting, maybe you've never been, but we'll help you know how to attend that school board meeting. And maybe you go to the school board meeting and you raise your voice for the first time and you say, hey, why does the school board think they have to do this? Well, have you ever been to Tallahassee? And so slowly but surely people begin to make the connection between harm being done to their kid in the classroom, in the school,
Mhm.
and decisions being made by politicians in a city they've never gone to. And and so I would just say continue to be visible. I think one of the things that I'm really grateful for with Mothership was reaching out in the midst of all of these and saying, hey, we have this presence in Florida and we want to make sure that our being there is a help to you all. And we want to support you financially, we want to give visibility, and so being able to send our team there and table and educate people and know that we're not just talking to Floridians, but we're talking to other people who can go back to their state and say, hey, you know what, in the place where they're throwing everything in the kitchen sink at us, we've seen that beacon of light. We know that we can fight back.
Yeah, that's excellent. So don't give up, don't stop and be visible. I like that. We can do
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Equality Florida was founded in 1997. And when you look back over the last 25 years plus, what gives you hope?
Oh, what gives me hope? What gives me hope is I grew up in the panhandle of Florida, and I know what it was like to go to school where we weren't in the curriculum. I know what it's like to go to school where there were no out teachers, and I know what it's like to live in a state where Anita Bryant had sort of stripped away all of the rights. You couldn't adopt, you couldn't marry, you were by definition illegal. Your existence was illegal. The idea that we would have um, inclusive curriculum. So for me, at this juncture, I say, yeah, it's tough right now. We're seeing things being taken away, but we're also defending things that were unimaginable when I was a kid.
Mm,
So the progress has been dramatic in our state, and the backlash has been dramatic too. So, for me, I look at where we are, and I want to tell people it's important to remember how far we've come and also be impatient for change. And I think one of the other things is, if I were to add to the prescription, joy. It has always been a bedrock of organizing in our community. you know, Whether it's, dancing at a nightclub or seeing a drag show or going to a women's music festival or, we have always found each other and supported each other with joy. And I think it is important because sometimes people separate. There's the things that happen with the culture, the music and the fun, and then there's the political work. And I grew up in an era where there was no distinction between them. And I think we have to tap into that joy and that creativity to weather these tough times and to find each other and to stay grounded, because you don't want to become the thing that hates you. You don't want to recreate those patterns. We actually envision a world that works for everybody. There was a hetero awesome festival in Boise, Idaho,
mhm.
and if you've seen this, it's worth looking up because it was a very sad, sad turnout. But here's the thing. Some of my best friends are hetero. Like we're pro hetero. Go team, right? I'm
Yeah.
not a practitioner, but I'm a fan of the art. It's all good. It's not a competition. It's not Red Rover. And what the reason that this event just was a complete disaster is it was because it was created to oppose the existence of other people, as opposed to pride, which is to celebrate that we all get to coexist. And so for me, this is a moment where we can actually show a world that is too fearful, too divided, too cut off from their authentic selves, you know, masquerade. Somebody told me today on a radio show, was saying, when conservative conventions are in town, Grinder goes off you know, for
Hmm.
anyone who doesn't know Grinder, which is a gay men's hookup um, app, but it's sort of like your repression is part of the backlash that we are experiencing. And if you could just get happy and healthy with yourselves, you would not obsess about making life hard for us or our kids. And so we want the world where we get to be ourselves. And we want the world where you get to be you, because it is not healthy to spend all of your time wondering how you can make life harder for LGBTQ people. That's my shout out to the majority party in Tallahassee. There's a better life for you once you stop obsessing about us, obsessing about doing us harm, because you're just telling on yourself.
Mm. Yeah.
Gloria, you're like, that's a lot to unpack. But yes,
It
have,
is, but I hear you for sure.
yeah,
Yeah, there's
yes. But
better
having
ways to spend
fun,
time.
yeah. Truly, truly better ways. But having fun is not just a side dish to the political work. It is part of how we do this work. It's part of how we sustain each other and connect. And it's because this movement began. We are the team that is all for freedom, all for liberty, all for accountability and personal responsibility, not imposing and intruding and sticking your nose in other people's business and telling other people how to live. Um, we want everybody to have a great time.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, we know that you all are doing amazing work in Florida. Um, for LGBTQ people and allies outside of Florida, what can they do to make a real difference? Like, what are the most impactful actions people can take right now? We talked
Yeah.
big, broad strokes about, don't stop, show up, be visible, share and
Yeah.
joy, but what are there specific things that people can do?
Yes, there are specific things. If you recognize Florida as a front line in this battle, a place where, Anita Bryant was born here. And I tell people this in other states because she didn't stay in Florida. She took that hateful campaign all across the country. And so I would say invest in the fight here. A lot of people travel here for business because they've got family. I have a friend in Illinois who has family here. Anytime she comes, she calculates how much she paid in sales tax, and she donates that amount to Equality Florida, which I thought was a pretty creative way of navigating that. But yeah, financially support. There's plenty of ways. If you live in another state, there's the likelihood that there is another organization that we work with in your state, whether it's Equality Ohio or Outfront, Minnesota, you can find a state organization. Um, and I would just say that there's the political work that you can do through the organizations that exist, but there's also the work that you can do because you have a network of people that will listen to you before they will listen to any organization's email. You have a unique influence. And sometimes what we discover is people aren't helping because they've never been asked.
Mm,
So I would say in your own circle of influence, beyond donating and becoming a member of Equality Florida and or your state group and figuring out ways you can volunteer, reach out to the people who are uniquely in your circle and say, "Hey, where are you on this?" And have the conversations that can say, "Hey, you know what? There's an election coming up. Why don't we, the five of us, phone bank together? Why don't the five of us make a contribution? Why don't we, there's use that creativity, and if you're a musician, you can, do a gig and invite people and invite a speaker. Like this is the time for that kind of grassroots creativity."
I love that. That's great. We actually had, so we sent out a newsletter and put some stuff on Instagram. So we had some people from Bramley write in and ask some questions. So I'm going to do a couple of those
Sure.
before we sign off for today. So this is, I think that you sort of already answered this, but I'm going to give it to you anyways and see if you want to add anything. So this
Okay.
is a small business owner, and their question is like, how can small businesses or cultural organizations like the Black and queer owned indie bookstore I run meaningfully support Equality Florida's work beyond donations? They're saying, hey, I'd love to collaborate. And so my first thought is, well, if you're going to have a music night with the speaker, it sounds like you found a place to have it. But
Yeah,
are there other ideas of specific things that like small business owners can
sure.
do?
Listen, I think this is a really important time because when it comes to businesses, because what we've seen is a lot of businesses that marketed were happy to take dollars from our community, fold like a cheap tent in the first strong wind. And people who swore these were values of theirs, it turns out, no, not so much. They were just marketing. But that means the ones who are still standing, it matters because it tells us that through thick and thin, they're going to stand on those principles. So I would say shout out to all of the businesses, large, small, and medium, that are still, 10 toes down, standing on business. And I would say for small businesses, reach out. And, I think for us in Florida, we have a program called Equality Means Business and Open Doors Florida, which is intended to say, don't spend your money in places that don't respect your humanity. Don't, I know a lot of people aren't shopping at some of the big stores that backed off of pride and reverse their diversity, equity, inclusion. I know there are several stores I haven't set foot in for quite some time, but I've also found smaller companies, smaller businesses that are solidly with us. And I would say, make it visible. And not only that, reach out to other businesses around you and say, hey, who else is with me? Who else will put this sign in the window? Who else will sign on to this op-ed, or be part of this network of companies that are visibly taking a stand in this way, and it will encourage others to do likewise, because we're all paying close attention to who gave lip service and folded and who stood tall and who's stepping up maybe for the first time, because now it's clear that a question has been called and you've got to figure out which side of history you're going to stand on.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Um, all right, and then one more here. What's one bold vision or goal you hope to see realized in the next 5 years? And what kind of support makes that possible?
Wow. Okay.
I like that. I love the word
Yeah,
bold. Like,
I
be bold
know.
here, Nadine.
Well, I will tell you what comes to mind really is working with parents. Everyone who's been following politics, you may have seen the Scrimetti decision that the
Mhm.
Supreme Court made, and if you didn't, basically the the court had a choice. It could side with parents and families and their kids or politicians, and the U.S. Supreme Court chose politicians. And you can't sugarcoat how hateful this decision is and how much harm it does. Um, but it also reminds us of how important it is to support those parents and those families who are fighting for their kids, who are willing to stand up, who are willing to do the right thing. And so when we started organizing parents here in Florida, we just had a few dozen. We could barely handle the onslaught of calls that we began to get. And right now, we're going to need a bigger boat. And I will tell you, the big, bold vision for me
Yeah.
is that instead of a few thousand families, we're able to organize parents in Florida to be a decisive force in our state, in every school district, in every election cycle. And the work that we are doing in Florida, other states have already reached out and said, we want to replicate because we see what you did when it comes to Moms for Liberty. And we see the difference it makes when parents are speaking in their own voice and lifting up the voice of their kids so that the far right can't wrap what they're doing in the propaganda of protecting parents when really they're doing the exact opposite and taking rights and protections away from parents. I'd be remiss if I didn't include this. Recently, just like in this last week, a Republican lawmaker in Florida ended up in the emergency room when an ectopic pregnancy ruptured. Now, we're a state where the same lawmakers that have said, young people, parents, you have no control over your own body. We decide. The governor and the state legislature, not you, not your parents, not your doctors, not science. We decide who you can be, what medical care you get access to. So here's this Republican lawmaker. She ends up in the emergency room, a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. This is a life and death situation. But because of the laws she helped pass, doctors are terrified to give her treatment. They're terrified that if they're taken to court and have to explain why they didn't wait longer, was she really in as dire a situation? Because this is happening in all of these, in states where this has happened, these terrible decisions are having to be made. Well, here she is. She grabs her phone and she's like, look, I voted for this bill. I'm the one that can tell you what it means and what it doesn't mean, not the courts. That's not how that works. The courts decide, not you because you voted for it. She ends up calling the governor's office to get the governor's office to reassure doctors that that they won't be prosecuted under Florida law. And she gets an abortion. She gets the medicine she needs to end this pregnancy that could have killed her. And my point is, they don't want to stop these things. They want to stop them for the people they don't want to have access to health care and point to their name on a bill or has the governor's cell phone. And so I want people to understand that this is it is an attack on trans kids, but it's an attack on all of our ability to access health care that we need, that we deserve, that they do not care that they're taking a lifeline away from young people. They did not care that if you're not a Republican lawmaker with special access, they don't care that they've put your life in danger by passing these abortion bans. And so even if this is not affecting you directly and immediately, I think a really important message for people to understand is that it is affecting you by eroding the most basic and fundamental right we all have, which is control of our own bodies, decision making about our own health care. And so you got to raise hell before it comes to your door, because we're all living in that Niemöller quote, poem about how first they came, for the trade unionists, and I wasn't a trade unionist. They are going to come after whoever they think is alone and vulnerable and sharpen their sword until they get to your backyard.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and it's so important to remember that. And so kind of going off of, you've talked a lot about parents and how important it is to activate parents and to have them involved. Um, Obviously, we know that there are a lot of young people out there. And so, what's your message to young LGBTQ people who are coming of age in this moment, trying to make a sense of a country that feels and is and seems so hostile to their existence? So, tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, I want to be careful, as somebody going, hey, it's so much better than when I was a kid, because
Mhm.
that's cold comfort,
Yeah.
right? But I mention it simply to say extraordinary progress is possible,
Yeah.
that the things that we are fighting to preserve were things that were unimaginable to me when I was in junior high and high school. And so my biggest message is this is not the end of the story. We have had cycles of progress and backlash. And I think one of the most important things to know that is in the midst of backlash, they are also provoking conversations that set the groundwork for when that backlash ends. And I often invoke a slingshot because they think they're pulling us backwards, but they're really creating the dynamic tension that when we break their grip, we don't just come back to where we were, we spring forward. And
Mhm.
so to young people, I would want to instill the knowledge that we can end this backlash. And in fact, there's plenty of evidence that a backlash is in some ways a recognition that the culture has already shifted. The fact that the things they're arguing about now are things they could not even have given voice to before.
Mhm.
But we have always existed. The LGBTQ community has always existed across every continent, across every culture, across every age. We are and we always will be. And this will end. This backlash will end. And so I would say to younger people, get involved now, not just to stop the harm, but to prepare for that future that you deserve to be born into, the future that the next generation deserves. And it is a future that is inclusive. We are not trying to just replace the people who are in power. We are working to create a world where power is shared, where we don't have to have scapegoats, where we don't have to whip people into a hateful frenzy by targeting any minority or making up things about immigrants or exercising so much control so that the world doesn't seem out of control to us. We want you, whoever you are, to be your full self. And you won't get there trying to hold us down.
Mhm. That's beautiful. I'm very excited to see that slingshot forward.
Yes,
I, I'm ready for that. So
absolutely.
that's absolutely lovely. All
Yeah.
right. So here's what we're gonna say. We're gonna say, don't stop speaking up, being present, being visible, being active in your communities. Um, Work with those around you. You can do the big scale stuff, but like you're saying, I think it's so important to remember that, your circle of five friends or families that you interact with on a regular basis, And I love the idea of doing stuff together. I know the first time I did phone banking, I did it with my best friend, and that made it much better than venturing out there by myself. So, and then yeah, I love the idea of like joy for everyone. Like we're not trying to suppress, we're trying to bring joy and let people be their true and authentic selves. And we need everyone to stick with us
Yeah.
and do that. Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us. I know I think I said before you hopped on the first time that I talked to you, I got off the phone. I was like, how do we spread this amazing person and all that she has to say for everyone to hear? So I hope that I know that you have a beautiful presence everywhere, and I hope that we can widen that audience a little bit today because you are inspiring and just you fill me with energy and hope, and I'm so grateful for that and all the work that you guys do at Equality Florida.
Well, thank you. And I really do want to say thank you, to Looking Out Foundation and to the fans and, for showing up for the fight. You didn't have to, and you did. And you've invited so many other people to join. And I would say uh, visit equalityflorida.org. If there's not a local group for you to get involved in, we have lots of remote ways to get involved. And one of the things about our community over time, when people talk about the most creative moments, the origin of music, the literature, theater, we are such a generative and amazing people who contribute across all cultures. Like you can't talk about the contributions of the Black community to America without talking about Black queer people. From Harlem Renaissance to disco and all of these things. And I just want to remind us of that because we are being told such horrible things and young people are being told such horrible things, such horrible lies. So I just want to make sure that somebody today tells you that you come from a rich and generative and creative and amazing tradition. You are a gift to this world. Your presence makes other people safer. I would have loved to have seen my community when I was growing up instead of feeling isolated and alone in the middle of nowhere, Panhandle, Florida. And so every place that you are present and visible matters. And I will just tell you, when I was a kid, I remember going to New York and being on the Staten Island ferry, and there was a lesbian couple holding hands. And all the kids on that ferry were making fun of them, were saying horrible things, including my cousins. And I remember I must have circled that boat 30 times as it traveled from Manhattan to Staten Island, just looking at them out of the corner of my eye. I didn't say a word to them, and that couple will never, ever know that their humanity, their existence, their love for each other was like a core memory in me. And so that is why when I say being visible, it's not about celebrity and it's not about being, you know, it's about in your daily life being authentically yourself because you never know who's watching.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I'm just so honored that you gave us your time today. And if Nadine inspired you, please consider sharing this with your friends and community. Please follow Looking Out Foundation and Equality Florida to continue to learn more and support our work. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.